The world is undergoing rapid transformation, and the United States no longer holds the unchallenged superpower status it once did. Numerous countries are asserting their independence from U.S. influence, choosing to forge their own paths, establish new alliances, and determine their own destinies. Nations are increasingly moving away from reliance on the U.S. dollar, engaging in new trade agreements, and reassessing long-standing military ties. Former loyal allies are now prioritizing self-reliance and regional partnerships, thereby creating new economic and political power centers. As this significant global shift continues, a crucial question remains. What are the implications for America's global power? Before we begin, please like and subscribe to our channel. Let us examine 10 countries where the U.S. is experiencing a diminishing grip in 2025. Number 10. Indonesia. Indonesia is gradually distancing itself from American influence, opting to concentrate on internal development and strengthen relationships with its regional neighbors. As Southeast Asia's largest economy, Indonesia is taking decisive steps towards greater autonomy. Rather than aligning with Western powers like the U.S., Indonesia is actively pursuing economic independence. The nation is developing its domestic industries, implementing extensive infrastructure projects, and expanding trade agreements with China, other Asian nations, and various global partners. Furthermore, Indonesia is exploring alternative trading mechanisms to reduce its dependence on the U.S. dollar, aligning with the global trend of de-dollarization. Politically, Indonesia maintains a neutral and independent stance. While it cooperates with the U.S. on security matters, it refuses to take sides in international power struggles, positioning itself as one of the world's most prominent non-aligned nations. Instead of depending on Western influence, Indonesia is now leading Southeast Asia through ASEAN, advocating for enhanced regional unity and economic independence from the West. As Indonesia's power and influence grow, its emphasis on self-reliance and regional partnerships is weakening America's hold on Southeast Asia. Number 9. France. France is progressively withdrawing from American influence, advocating for a stronger and more independent Europe. President Emmanuel Macron has been a vocal proponent of Europe's need to stand independently, politically, economically, and militarily. Instead of relying on the U.S. for military protection, Macron believes Europe should develop its own defense system and reduce its dependence on NATO, where the U.S. holds significant power. Economically, France is also challenging American dominance. Many European nations, including France, are dissatisfied with the U.S. dollar's global dominance and are exploring alternative currencies for trade. This initiative is part of a broader effort to strengthen the euro and mitigate the impact of U.S. economic policies and sanctions. Furthermore, France has criticized U.S. foreign policies, particularly its approach to China and military interventions worldwide. Macron has cautioned that Europe should not simply follow America's lead but rather make decisions based on its own interests. While France remains a Western ally, its pursuit of independence is altering its relationship with the U.S., with one of Europe's most influential nations choosing its own course. America's grip on Europe is beginning to loosen. Number 8. Pakistan. Pakistan is discreetly reducing its reliance on American influence, choosing to cultivate stronger ties with China and other regional allies. For years, the U.S. considered Pakistan a vital strategic partner, but this dynamic is rapidly changing. Pakistan is now prioritizing self-sufficiency and seeking new alliances instead of relying on American military aid and financial support. A primary catalyst for this shift is China's substantial investment in Pakistan. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project, has infused Pakistan with Chinese capital and development, diminishing its dependence on U.S. financial aid and international institutions controlled by Washington. Moreover, Pakistan is revising its military strategy. Instead of primarily procuring weapons from the U.S., it is now acquiring advanced defense equipment from China and Russia. This transition is significantly weakening U.S. military influence over Pakistan. Tensions between the U.S. and Pakistan have escalated over issues such as counter-terrorism policies and regional security. Consequently, Pakistan is seeking new partners, strengthening its ties with Russia, China, and Middle Eastern nations, and adopting a more balanced approach rather than adhering to Washington's directives. With enhanced trade, military agreements, and political relationships outside of the U.S., Pakistan is clearly breaking free from American influence. The central question now is whether Pakistan's new alliances will reshape global power in Asia. Number 7. Germany. Germany, once a steadfast U.S. ally, is now reassessing its relationship with Washington. The global landscape is changing rapidly, and Germany is no longer automatically following U.S. leadership. Several factors contribute to this shift. Firstly, the energy crisis following the Ukraine war exposed a significant vulnerability. Germany's heavy reliance on Russian gas left it exposed when supplies were disrupted, causing energy prices to soar. To stabilize its economy, Germany is exploring new solutions that may diverge from U.S. interests. Secondly, Germany is spearheading Europe's push for independence. Instead of relying on the U.S. for military, economic, and technological support, Germany is joining France in building a stronger, self-reliant Europe, which implies reduced control from Washington and increased power for Europe itself. Thirdly, Germany is maintaining ties with China despite U.S. pressure. China is Germany's largest trading partner, and industries such as automotive and manufacturing depend heavily on Chinese markets. Although the U.S. urges its allies to reduce business with China, Germany cannot afford to comply. Therefore, while Germany remains a U.S. ally, it is gradually distancing itself from American influence. Its growing ties with China, a strengthened European identity, and a revised approach to global power are altering the dynamics, potentially to the U.S.'s disadvantage. Number 6. Mexico. Mexico, once a close U.S. partner, is gradually reducing its reliance on Washington's influence. Although the U.S. remains Mexico's largest trading partner, Mexico is cultivating stronger ties with China and other global markets. A significant development is China's increasing investment in Mexico. Over the past few years, China has invested billions in Mexican manufacturing and infrastructure, providing a new source of economic power that diminishes U.S. influence. Simultaneously, Mexico is reconsidering its dependence on the U.S. dollar, aligning with the growing trend of economic diversification. Political tensions between Mexico and the U.S. are also contributing to this shift. Disputes over trade policies, immigration, border security, and sovereignty have created significant friction. Conflicts over tariffs, supply chains, and border regulations have compelled Mexico to seek new partners to mitigate U.S. economic pressure. Even though Mexico remains deeply integrated with the American economy, it is quietly gaining greater independence. As Mexico strengthens its global influence, the question arises whether it is preparing for a future where it is less dependent on the U.S. Number 5. South Africa. South Africa, seeking a balance between Western powers and emerging global forces, is turning towards BRICS, a group that challenges Western dominance. This move is gradually diminishing U.S. influence not only in South Africa but across the African continent. The primary reason for this shift is South Africa's deepening relationship with China and Russia. China has become South Africa's largest trading partner, investing heavily in mining, manufacturing, and infrastructure projects. Meanwhile, South Africa refuses to oppose Russia, maintaining strong diplomatic and military ties with Moscow. Furthermore, South Africa has openly criticized U.S. foreign policies, particularly regarding economic sanctions, military interventions, and pressure tactics used to exert control over other nations. South Africa advocates for a new world order where Western countries do not hold exclusive power. It also supports reforms in global organizations such as the United Nations and the International Monetary Fund to reduce U.S. and European dominance. Consequently, while South Africa maintains some ties with the U.S., its growing allegiance to BRICS, strong relationships with China and Russia, and advocacy for a more independent world are significantly weakening American control over the region. The balance of power is shifting rapidly, potentially beyond Washington's ability to control. Number 4. Brazil. Brazil, Latin America's largest economy, is gradually distancing itself from U.S. influence and pursuing a more independent path. While it continues to trade and cooperate with Washington, its leaders are taking decisive steps to reduce reliance on the U.S. A key factor driving this shift is China's expanding role in Brazil's economy. China has surpassed the U.S. as Brazil's largest trading partner, purchasing substantial quantities of Brazilian soybeans, iron ore, and oil. This signifies that Brazil's economic future is increasingly tied to Beijing rather than Washington. Moreover, Brazil is advocating for a move away from the US dollar. Along with other BRICS nations, it supports alternative trade systems using local currencies, reducing its vulnerability to the American financial system. Politically, Brazil is asserting its independence from the US. Its leaders advocate for a world where smaller nations have greater influence, challenging Western dominance. Brazil has also been critical of U.S. policies on trade, military interventions, and environmental issues, favoring a diplomatic approach that benefits Latin America and BRICS nations. Therefore, Brazil is no longer simply following U.S. directives. It is strengthening ties with China, playing a more prominent role in BRICS, and pursuing economic independence. This significant shift is gradually weakening American control over Latin America, and the world is observing closely. Number 3. India. India, once a close U.S. partner, is now charting its own course, reducing its dependence on Washington and building stronger ties with other global powers. While India continues to collaborate with the U.S. on trade and defense, it is taking decisive steps to diminish American influence over its policies. A primary driver of this shift is India's push for self-reliance through its Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. Instead of relying on American weapons and technology, India is developing its own defense industry and procuring more military equipment from Russia, even disregarding U.S. sanctions on Moscow. Furthermore, India has continued to purchase Russian oil despite Western pressure to cease, demonstrating its prioritization of national interests over Washington's preferences. Economically, India is strengthening ties with BRICS nations, particularly China and Russia, and challenging U.S. financial control by reducing its use of the U.S. dollar. It has entered into trade agreements allowing transactions in local currencies, lessening its dependence on American banking systems. In global politics, India is adopting a strategic approach. It participates in the US-led Quad alliance with Japan and Australia, intended to counter China's influence, but simultaneously refuses to join Western sanctions against Russia, consistently making independent choices. Consequently, India is no longer adhering to Washington's dictates. It is evolving into a genuinely independent global power by prioritizing self-reliance, strategic alliances, and balanced foreign policies, gradually diminishing U.S. control and emerging as a global force accountable only to itself. Number 2. Turkey. For decades, Turkey was a loyal U.S. ally and a key member of NATO. However, under President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, Turkey is making significant strides to break free from U.S. control and pursue a more independent path. A notable development is Turkey's growing proximity to Russia, despite NATO warnings. Turkey's acquisition of Russian S-400 missile defense systems resulted in U.S. sanctions and its exclusion from the F-35 fighter jet program. Nevertheless, Ankara persisted, continuing to trade with Russia even after the US and Europe imposed stringent sanctions following the Ukraine war. Moreover, Turkey is strengthening ties with China, expanding trade and infrastructure deals under China's Belt and Road Initiative, and gradually reducing its reliance on the US dollar by conducting more business in local currencies, thereby lessening its dependence on Washington's financial system. Politically, Erdoğan is challenging U.S. influence in the Middle East. Turkey is pursuing its own agenda in conflicts involving Syria and Iraq, openly contesting U.S. policies in the region. It also opposes American support for Kurdish groups, which Turkey perceives as a major security threat. Therefore, while Turkey remains in NATO, it is no longer blindly following the U.S. Its closer ties with Russia and China, pursuit of economic independence, and assertive foreign policies are transforming it into a powerful and unpredictable force on the world stage. The era of U.S. dominance over Turkey is rapidly waning. Number 1. Saudi Arabia. For decades, Saudi Arabia and the U.S. maintained a close partnership, collaborating on oil, security, and defense. However, Saudi Arabia is now gradually distancing itself from American influence and cultivating stronger ties with China and other global powers. A significant development is Saudi Arabia's decision to sell oil in Chinese yuan, challenging the U.S. dollar's dominance in global trade and potentially disrupting the entire financial system. For years, Saudi Arabia exclusively sold oil in dollars, granting Washington significant control. Now, the kingdom is rewriting the rules. Furthermore, China has become Saudi Arabia's largest trading partner, investing heavily in energy, infrastructure, and technology. Saudi Arabia is also aligning itself with BRICS, expressing interest in joining the group, which would further diminish U.S. influence. Another notable shift is Saudi Arabia's engagement in peace negotiations with Iran, facilitated by China. Previously, the US and Saudi Arabia were united against Iran, but Riyadh is now negotiating directly with its former rival. Additionally, Saudi Arabia is reducing its reliance on US military support, opting to manage its own security affairs with greater autonomy. Consequently, while Saudi Arabia is not completely severing ties with the US, the era of complete American control is diminishing. Its deepening ties with China, growing role in BRICS, and move away from dollar-based oil sales are reshaping global power, and Washington is losing its grip.